The morning of July 17th had begun like any other for Dr. Aris Thorne. He was on the 8:15 a.m. tram heading to the National Observatory, a lukewarm coffee clutched in his hand. The tram rattled pleasantly through the city, the mundane rhythm of a Monday commute. His thoughts were a swirl of astronomical data, his upcoming presentation, and the nagging suspicion he'd forgotten to feed his cat, Luna. Then, at precisely 8:27 a.m., the world inverted. It wasn't a sudden jerk, not an earthquake. It was a sensation of utter, impossible lightness, followed by a collective gasp from the tram passengers. Aris's coffee, until that moment a reliable liquid, exploded upwards, a brown nebula splattering across the ceiling. He felt his feet lift from the floor, his briefcase floating lazily beside him. A woman across the aisle shrieked, her handbag spiraling like a confused satellite. Panic, a raw, primal scream, erupted. Aris, an astrophysicist by trade, felt his mind race. Not an earthquake. No, this was an absence. An absence of the fundamental force that held the universe together, gravity. He instinctively grabbed a handrail, his knuckles white. Around him, people were drifting, bumping into the ceiling, then each other, a grotesque ballet of weightless bodies. A child, initially delighted by the novelty, began to cry, his toy car hovering just out of reach. Outside the tram window, the scene was pure, terrifying chaos. Cars, no longer bound to the asphalt, were bouncing erratically, some flipping over as if caught in an invisible, monstrous hand. Pedestrians were flailing, reaching for anything rooted, but many simply floated upwards, their screams dissolving into the sky. Aris watched in horror as a lamppost, its concrete base ripping from the pavement, twisted upwards, a metallic corkscrew aiming for the heavens. He saw a dog, caught mid-leap, hang suspended, barking frantically at his uncooperative leash. Buildings, those ancient anchors of human civilization, felt different. They hummed with an unnatural tension, their foundations groaning as the incredible weight that usually pinned them down vanished. Cracks, thin as spiderwebs, began to appear in the tram's ceiling as the structure itself started to flex. His professional brain kicked in, trying to make sense of the impossible. 5 minutes. What would happen in 5 minutes? Anything not securely fastened to the Earth's crust would become a projectile. The atmosphere itself, usually held by gravity's embrace, would begin to dissipate, albeit slowly at first. Water in open containers, oceans, rivers, they would bubble upwards, turning into shimmering, unstable domes. And then there were the objects in orbit. Satellites, space stations. Were they now truly adrift, or would they be less affected by a sudden, localized gravitational anomaly on Earth? His thoughts tumbled over themselves, each scientific fact more horrifying than the last. Looking at his watch, a flicker of hope, he had counted to 45 seconds. 45 seconds of absolute pandemonium. The tram had drifted sideways, scraping against a nearby building, the sound of tearing metal deafening. Loose debris, dust, discarded papers all swirled around them inside the tram, a miniature storm of forgotten things. Someone was praying aloud. Another was laughing hysterically, the fragile human mind breaking under the impossible strain. He saw the elderly woman who usually sat opposite him, her kind face now etched with terror, clinging to the seat below her feet dangling. He instinctively extended a hand, trying to reach her, but the movement only pushed him further away from the handrail he was holding. He had to stay anchored. The worst thing would be to float out of the tram, out into the great unknown. Outside, the first major structural failures began. A skyscraper in the distance, a monolith of glass and steel, groaned, its top floors shearing off, drifting like enormous, deadly icebergs. The sky was no longer just blue. It was streaked with debris, with human figures, with the impossible detritus of a world unmoored. 2 minutes, 120 seconds. The air inside the tram was growing thin, the atmosphere leaking out. People gasped for breath, their faces turning a faint blue. The sheer scale of the energy required to simply turn off gravity, even for a moment, was staggering. What kind of force could do this? A cosmic anomaly? A sudden, inexplicable shift in the universe's fundamental constants? Aris's mind, despite the terror, was alight with the scientific implications. A complete absence of gravity would mean a sudden halt to the planet's rotation, or at least its surface. The momentum of everything not anchored would be lost. only to slam back down when gravity returned. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. The impact would be catastrophic. Buildings would pancake, cars would shatter. The world would be remade in the crucible of a global impact event, not from above, but from below. He closed his eyes, bracing himself. 3 minutes. The tram was shaking violently now, its metal frame groaning under the unseen stresses. He could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of jet engines outside, no doubt planes struggling to maintain control, perhaps even falling out of the sky. The thought of planes, of the millions of tons of steel and fuel, simply falling, it was too much. 4 minutes. The noise of the city, usually a cacophony of traffic and voices, was now dominated by the eerie creaks of protesting structures and the chilling whoosh of air rushing upwards. The silence in the tram, save for ragged breaths, was profound. People had stopped screaming, conserving their precious air. They were all just waiting. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, gravity returned. It was an instantaneous, brutal snap. Aris slammed back onto the tram floor, the impact rattling his bones. The coffee cup he'd been holding shattered against the ceiling as it plummeted. Around him, the other passengers crashed down, groans and cries replacing the silence. Outside, the world was a symphony of destruction. The lamppost he'd seen earlier, now hundreds of feet in the air, plummeted back to earth, striking the road with a deafening roar. Cars, once weightless, became lethal projectiles, slamming into the ground, into each other, into buildings. The glass skyscraper, its top, now a separate entity, crashed down, sending a mushroom cloud of dust and debris into the sky. The tram, having drifted sideways, now crashed back onto the tracks, its wheels twisting into mangled scrap metal. Aris pushed himself up, every muscle aching. The tram was a wreck, its windows shattered, its interior filled with twisted metal and injured people. The elderly woman he'd seen earlier was slumped against the wall, unconscious. He rushed to her, checking for a pulse. Faint, but there. He looked out the broken window. The city was unrecognizable. Skyscrapers were mangled, their upper floors collapsed. Roads were cratered, strewn with debris. The sky, once clear, was dark with dust and smoke. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by a landscape of utter devastation. 5 minutes. 5 minutes that had undone centuries of human endeavor. 5 minutes that had redefined chaos. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, a chorus of despair and desperation, Aris knew one thing for certain: the world would never be the same. Humanity had just received a terrifying, undeniable lesson in the fragility of existence and the unyielding power of the fundamental forces that govern the universe. And he, Dr. Aris Thorne, had just witnessed the impossible, an event that would forever haunt his dreams and redefine his understanding of physics. The cat, Luna, he hoped, was okay.